I am designing these products, but I also am encouraging people to think about making music in a certain way, re-examine how they're making music and think about that process and be open to changes in it. Hey, making music can actually be fun. It doesn't have to be this super serious thing. It can be this experience that doesn't even have to have a result or an output. As long as you just kind of like spent some time doing something cool, that's time well spent.
You mentioned that you studied as an undergrad comp sci and music together, which is a fascinating combination. What does comp sci teach you about music, and what does music teach you about comp sci?
Yeah, I think that computer science is, in my opinion, probably the most applicable science, in the sense that really what it teaches you to do is solve problems. The entire field is essentially like, okay, I've got this problem, I'm breaking it down into these 3 problems that I need to solve. Each one of those breaks down into 4 or 5 subproblems. I just tackle this, and if I do that, I've solved the big problem. So I think that's just like such a really extensible, mentality that you can use for like anything. And I feel like even if I'm like working on an album, mixing stuff, or if I'm like recording a song, I think about it in the same way. Okay, I need to do this, and this for each of the instruments here, and then I have done it. I've mixed the track, So I think just the field of computer science has been really helpful for me just in my own life, like in terms of whatever I need to tackle. It's usually like a pretty good framework to fall back on. Obviously, like coding and everything is kind of like an application of that and a way to apply that. But I think I would say what I really learned in school was not like, how to put pen to page and write code. It was more of how to break down problems and solve them and everything. And then when it comes to music, I mean, it's just fascinating because it kind of like, it can work in the same way if you're approaching it really academically, but I think it's really cool in that it just also doesn't work that way at all. I mean, so much of music is just completely like vibes based. Like, I have no idea why I like this sound or why when I play these 2 notes together, they sound good together. Like, you could break it down and analyze the harmonics or whatever, but like, it's kind of a completely different world. And I think it's really fun to traverse back and forth between the 2 of them, which I get to do as a job now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's like you found the 2 sides in perfect harmony. Before you tell me about getting started with the plugins, tell me a little bit more about your musical background.
Yeah, my grandfather was a really awesome jazz guitarist here in the Philly area. And he had some like local notoriety and had like a persona called the Sheik. And he would get dressed up in garb and play these gigs. I think like no shoes, no socks. And, he'd have this like awesome band and they would just rip. And he had the opportunity to play with Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, people who came through Philly, which is really awesome. Growing up, I had never had like an interest in music. I mean, I didn't even really like listen to music, but obviously the family was super musical. It was like tangible, I would say. Like, it's always around. I remember having this like moment one day where sometimes the neurons just connect in a certain way. And I was like, oh yeah, like playing music would be cool. So I mentioned that to my mom. I was like, hey, what about like playing some music sometime? And I was 13 at the time. And she said, okay, well, your grandfather like lives around the corner. Let's go over there later and ask him for lessons. So when we went around the corner, I said, I want to learn guitar. It would be great if you would teach me. I think this was coming out of left field for everyone. And he said, sure, I'll teach you the way that I learned, which is basically that he just handed me one of his guitars and told me to figure it out. I think he had those Mel Bay books, the ones that like teach you like the C major scale across the strings or whatever in open position. So I think he gave me 1 or 2 of those as well. Predictably, I didn't do very well. which definitely became like a point of shame for a while, and I kind of avoided him. um, but eventually, I think once I actually started listening to music and getting into music myself, and there were songs that I wanted to play and wanted to learn, that's kind of when it all started clicking. So I definitely had the cart before the horse.
Did he give you some sweet hollow body jazz axe, or what was it?
It's an electric. It's it's not a hollow body, just like a solid body. It kind of looks like a Thunderbird, but not really. But yeah, it's super old. Like the coils are like ridiculously buzzy, but I've always wanted to like get it restored one day. So I'm holding on to it.
Family heirloom. You mentioned that between undergrad and getting going with the plugins, you spent a couple years at Google. What did you learn there that you're using now?
Like I was saying with computer science, you just learn how to solve problems. I think working as an engineer in the industry it's similar, but in a different way. I think it's kind of like the natural next step in the process, where not only are you solving problems, but you're kind of deciding like what is worth solving. You know, you kind of learn how to prioritize work, how to, you know, not just break things down into what is going to get something done, but, you know, what are the different ways I can break this down, and what's going to get me there fastest, or what's going to get me there in a way that doesn't block this other team member. So I think it was a really great place to learn, take that next step and to say, you know I can solve this problem, but I need to do it in a particular way, which is fascinating in its own right.
And what is it like there, just being there? I mean, it's for a computer science major and a budding engineer, it seems like being at Google would be either the Garden of Eden or the Death Star, depending on your perspective, or maybe both at once. You tell me.
Yeah, no, honestly, I think, I mean, it's such a big place. It's like, I think it can be either of those for different people. It really depends on kind of what you end up working on. And I think I got really lucky in that straight out of college, I basically got brought onto this team that was working on brand new products, which is not really super common at Google. We had the experience of almost operating as like a startup, but with, you know, the might of Google behind you, like not worried about profitability. You know, I like typed 6 lines of code and this thing that I wrote is now running on like 50 million machines or whatever. It was a really good experience, I think. It was almost like the product and me were walking in concert, you know, in that I was developing as an engineer. I think I got really lucky in that way, and the leadership on the team is awesome. I'm like still in contact with them, and we have this like running joke like now today, like when I need advice or I'm thinking about how to do something, I like talk to their like avatars in my head because I can like so clearly like hear exactly like what the recommendation would be. I got pretty lucky, I think, in what I ended up working on there. I think, you know, other than that, I mean, all the stories are pretty true about like the free food and, you know, slacking off and playing ping pong and all of that.
Did you ride a scooter around the campus?
Oh, so this was in New York. So it's basically just one gigantic building. But yes, they did have scooters, which you could ride inside the building. But I think most people were wise enough to know that it's like probably not a good idea to like ride a scooter around a building with like 10,000 people and like a laptop in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other.
That's only going to end one way.
Right.
So then tell me about leaving there and finding the moment where you decided to take the leap into plugins.
So I kind of worked on some music stuff like in my spare time when I was working there. And, you know, I was pretty content with that for a long time. You know, I think there is some merit to the idea that, you know, you work to support the life you want to live, you know. For a long time, I think that was fine. That was kind of where I got my fulfillment from. I was there for 5 years, and I think towards the end, you start feeling like, oh, I don't really care about this stuff that I'm doing for like 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. I'm like chipping away at this feature that is going to take like a year to finish and then take a year to launch. And it's like, at some point you get tired of it. So I was starting to like think about what would come next. And I think I took like a 2-month sabbatical at some point where I was just like, I'm just burning all my vacation days and going like unpaid for a little bit, which was nice. I think that was during like January one year. So I was doing like January, and kind of just doing music every day and having a blast. And so I was having those thoughts, and eventually the decision was made for me, and I got laid off in the first round of layoffs that they ever had, like right after COVID. So, you know, at first that was pretty scary. Then I was like, well, I was kind of thinking of doing this anyway, and you guys just gave me like a 6-month runway to like figure out whatever I'm doing next. I decided that I wanted to do music in some capacity. And I had no idea what that would look like, but you know, I knew that was kind of what I needed to do to like recharge at least for a while. And so I really threw myself into it. Monday morning, like going to the studio and working on music is like such a foreign concept when you've worked a 9-to-5 for so long. I might have recorded like one thing like a week before, and then I was like in the studio doing 4 things before lunch, and it was like awesome. And I was just having a lot of fun, and I was honing my craft. I was just messing around and developing as a musician, and kind of, it was like hyperspeed compared to what I did before.
And what kind of music?
It always kind of varies. Like I try to just like follow my mood, basically. I mean, it's always like electronic in some capacity. And usually has to do with like hardware synths. I always start on the Eurorack because that's kind of like the weirdest and hardest. It's like Pandora's box. It's like you can't fit it into somewhere it doesn't want to be. So I usually just start with it and then fit everything else around it. I started thinking about like, what can I do with that? So I would try to do like composition work. I was like basically cold calling people. Like I would see someone was working on a film or a video game, like on Instagram or Kickstarter or whatever, and I'm just sending them a message like, do you need a composer? And that probably went like as well as you'd expect it to. After, you know, a few months of that, I was kind of like, well, I don't know if this is working. I mean, I did like a small game and a short film, neither of which were really paying anything. So I was kind of like, what is the path here? So that's when I started thinking about like, how can I kind of bring the software engineering stuff back into the fold? Because, you know, for so long, I didn't even touch it for like 6 months. I was like, I've spent every day working on this and I'm kind of sick of it and I'm going to do something else for a while. But there was a time where it was like, it kind of like presented itself to me and said like, hey, it's probably time to get back on the horse. And that was kind of when I started having some very like skeletal ideas for plugins. And I found that, you know, once I kind of like opened myself up to the idea of them, then it just started flowing. It's like going in your backyard and finding like where the well should be, you know. It's like, this is where I should be digging, I think.
It's a good feeling. And had you been much of a plugin user before that?
I mean, we're all kind of like plugin users, I feel like, if you record music. But to me, they were not fun. My experience with plugins was that they were kind of what you use to get things done, and the hardware was where you have like fun. That's where you get inspired. That's where you have ideas. That's where you're like, you know, almost like collaborating with this tool. And, you know, my idea of plugins is like, yeah, that's like the EQ or like the ping pong delay, like the things that I don't really need to like sit there and like, you know, get inspired by like turning a knob back and forth.
You describe in each of the plugins that you've released, looking for the approach of something that feels more like a collaborator or even a band member than a tool you plop on top of something to tune up the sound. Tell me about that approach.
I didn't want to do the plugin thing if I was just kind of doing something I felt like was a utility. Especially because, you know, it's been done before. Like, why does anyone need my EQ? You know, my first thought when I was kind of sitting down to think like, well, what would be cool if it existed? You know, I turned to the hardware and the modular, and I was like, well, you know, I do this like patch like half the time I make music, and it takes like 10 to 15 modules, and it's a huge pain to like stand here and patch it all up. You know, what if that was just like a plugin where it's just like configurable? You know, I think there's this world between where there's utility on one end and then there's like the human being on the other end, and somewhere in between that the composition happens. And that was where I wanted to target. I was like, I want this to help you write a song. You know, it can't write the song for you, and it's not gonna like polish it and make it sound beautiful with, you know, this precision EQ or like soothe resonance suppression or whatever. You know, I tried to target that middle space where either you just need to get the ball rolling, or the ball is rolling but it's got a little bit of friction and you're trying to get it going. And I think that was what I felt like was really underexplored in that space. What is something that can just spark inspiration and spark creativity and then let you take it from there? And that was something that I felt like was really unique to different hardware devices like pedals or synths or modular or whatever. Just that feeling of this box has like a little bit of a life of its own. And, you know, I feel like I can reason with it, but I can't tell it to do anything. And I think that is like where so much of like our creativity as like human beings really shines, when we're forced to just make decisions, basically. That was what I really wanted to target and still continue to target with my products.
Well, and clearly you've done it in a really special way, because it seems like the response has been huge.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a ton of like really awesome people who have been coming back for each release, which I'm really thankful for, especially people from like day one who kind of like saw the vision and saw what I was going for. And I mean, that's really, really awesome. I kind of did my first plugin just almost for fun, basically. And the immediate adoption that it got was shocking to me. That was Weeping Wall.
And what did that feel like? Suddenly you realize there's people are getting it, and there's sort of growing, there's a public growing.
I mean, my first thought was like, well, I guess I have a job now. No, it's a great feeling, I think, just to kind of, it's hard to describe. I think like to me, to some respect, like I am designing these products, but I also am encouraging people to think about making music in a certain way, just to like re-examine how they're making music and think about that process, and kind of be open to changes in it. And I think that's what's been really awesome about people adopting these things, is it feels like I'm almost like, I don't want to say like a teacher to some extent, but like I feel like I have succeeded in some ways getting people to think about like that process. And hey, making music can actually be fun. It doesn't have to be this super serious thing. It can be this experience that doesn't even have to have a result or an output. You know, as long as you just kind of like spent some time doing something cool, like that's time well spent. So I think that's been really awesome to see, and to see people having that experience is probably the most gratifying thing.
That's fascinating. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because when you shared the plugins with me, it was serendipitously timed. I had hit a little bit of a wall on a track I was working on. I was in that rut where you're making microscopic changes to little sounds, and you're not inventing. The creativity is almost completely gone out of it. And deliberately, without reading the manuals, without wanting to know exactly what the possibilities were, at least to start, I started experimenting with Coastline and Riverwalk. And it did exactly what you're describing. Suddenly it was, the sounds kind of switched something else on in my brain. a more creative approach
Mm-hmm.
and said, what if it was like this? It was almost like having a good collaborator with no ego and
Yeah.
something that's based on your sounds, but with a completely different approach. Just step in and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, let's do this thing. And it completely transformed what I did that day.
That's super awesome. I mean, thank you for checking them out, firstly. But I mean, that's like, yeah, that's so cool to hear. That's kind of the exact goal, is like just to re-examine like that, what it means to make music, and to help you kind of like inject or re-inject your own creativity into the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One, particularly for people who haven't gotten to use your plugins yet, maybe talk about Coastline a little bit, the newest
Yeah.
one, what it does,
Mhm.
and how someone should think about it if they're trying to get their head around what it does.
So Coastline is, I'm going to preface this and say it's a little hard to elevator pitch it, so I might be a little long-winded, but Coastline is basically a really weird looper at its heart. And it basically is a sustainer, if you're familiar with the concept. It kind of records audio and plays it forever, because that's the most basic form of this concept. Like, you record audio and you just loop it. Coastline kind of takes that one step further, and it doesn't just loop the audio, it actually resynthesizes it. And as a result, you kind of get this like infinite ethereal version of the sound. And it kind of lets you play around with how it's resynthesized, because it has an additive synthesizer which targets the frequencies that it finds in the signal. It also has a granular synth that actually replays the audio. So between the two, you can kind of decide if you want this really distilled version from the additive synthesizer. You could just resynthesize the fundamental of the notes that it picks up for the most basic form of resynthesis. Or you can kind of get the actual audio, which obviously has the original timbre, it has the original texture and sound in it. So you can kind of navigate this really interesting space between like how accurate or how abstract you are kind of reimagining this audio. Everything flows from there. You can sculpt that sound with, filter, reverb, modulation, whatever, but it also all flows into this audio matrix, which lets you basically intermodulate and distort the different audio in Coastline. And by that, I mean, like, if you're familiar with Buchla or any like complex oscillator, you basically have two simple oscillators that you can make interact, like with FM or ring mod or whatever. You're creating a complex result from two things that are simple. And Coastline kind of lets you do the same thing, where you could say, hey, I want to take that additive synth and I want that to modulate the input source. And then all of a sudden you have this like distortion that is kind of harmonically relevant and following along with what you're doing. And it's not just like a rat clone or like whatever other, like, I don't know, like JFET, like kind of distortion. Like, it is something that is relevant to what you're playing in a really interesting way. So it basically the experience starts as this resynthesizer that just kind of creates like ambient washes and atmosphere and that kind of stuff, but you can quickly push it into like just straight distortion, harmonic destruction if you really want to explore that territory. So that's why I say it's a little hard to elevator pitch, because it to me, it's kind of like the modern version of like working with tape loops, like on a Tascam, where you're recording these different loops and then you're kind of playing with the settings and hearing like how they interact and how like what gets weird when it's overlapped and what gets interesting, and kind of how can I push this into complete, anarchy. That's essentially Coastline in I don't know what that was, like a 3.5 minute pitch.
Well, it's an incredibly clear and precise explanation of what it does. And like I said, it has the quality you get from, some of the great pedals that are a little bit on the more complex side, and certainly from a great plugin that you instantly get it. It feels so musical. It gets your creativity flowing, just like you said. So it seems like a huge success to me. And I'm really curious too about your experience with Outgrowth. If I understand, that was a collaboration with Tyler, who records under Blank Forms. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience working with him and what you guys got up to with the plugin?
Yeah. So Outgrowth, the TLDR is that it's basically I guess I would call it a sample player. Basically, it's a sample-based instrument. So it kind of has some of the familiar symptoms of a synthesizer, but it kind of uses samples as the source material. So Tyler, his main business is basically selling sample packs, making and selling samples. We had been friends for a long time, like over a decade at this point. And he was one of the first people I kind of talked to when I was doing some soul searching and trying to figure out how to, make money off of music. So we had been in touch a lot throughout that process. And like at some point we kind of like sat down and we were like, it would be cool to do some sort of plugin together. Like I've got the technical expertise, like he is just so much like heavier into the sound design and this world of, I want to almost call it like accurate sound design. He'll hear something, he's like, oh, that's like, there's a crazy resonance in there that I like totally missed. He just like is so dialed in when it comes to like that, the actual act of like, kind of mixing and arrangement and that sort of stuff. We were putting our heads together and we're thinking like, okay, like some sort of sample player essentially would be really interesting, because obviously he's got all these samples and has a lot of experience in making them. But then he kind of got to design like, well, what would be really interesting ways to play samples or like work with them or reimagine them, which is something that he had never kind of gotten the chance to do. You kind of like hand off a bunch of dot waves to someone and then you kind of, they're going to do whatever they're going to do with them. So to have some ability to kind of encourage people to use them in a particular way, I think was pretty exciting for him. And I think we kind of had like a few core tenets when it came to designing Outgrowth. The main one that we tried to tackle first was like, we want this to be the most easily usable sample player on the market. Like just drag however many samples in, it detects the pitch of them like quickly and it just maps them across the keyboard, and now you've got a multi-sample instrument just from dragging this in. Because Tyler's experience had been, recording all of these sample packs, like recording like, his piano like across the entire range, and then having to manually like set the range in Ableton Simpler or whatever, like okay, this one's C3 to G3. So we were like, okay, what if you just drag and drop it and it's done? Like that alone is cool. And then from there we got into the actual like sound design capabilities. And I think a lot of what Outgrowth does is kind of things people have done for years on the timeline, like manipulating like audio files directly like on the timeline, like copy paste stuff. It lets you do that kind of stuff, but as an actual like playable instrument. Like one example, I think like Fortet has this trick where he kind of like creates one track and then he duplicates it and pitches it up an octave, but the octave version, because it would be way faster, you have to extend it. So he kind of like duplicates each section of it to splay it back out again and reverses every other chunk. So you've got the original sound and then you've got this like octave up, which is like kind of ping-ponging back and forth between forward and reverse. And Outgrowth just like has that as a mode. We called it Reflect, and it sustains a sample forever just by playing it back and forth basically. So I think we took a lot of inspiration from like what people have done with samples for like years and years, and kind of just reimagine them as like, what would it be like to have this as an instrument basically. I use outgrowth like all the time personally, which I think is it's the mark of a job well done. It's like if your own song comes on your phone or whatever, and you don't run away screaming. It's like, that's usually the mark of like doing something pretty good, I think.
For sure. And tell me about your own music making. It's been a couple of years since you've released an album. Obviously, I'm sure the plug-in work and building a company takes up an enormous amount of time, but tell me about your own music making these days.
Yeah, it's super on and off, unfortunately. I mean, as you can imagine, it's like so much of my time goes into testing these tools and kind of dialing them in. So there's like ebbs and flows to it, where I'll be in the habit of like almost every day I'm like recording something. And I think right now I'm in a down period where I really haven't used Ableton much except for testing things. So it kind of comes and goes, and I try to just kind of ride whatever my energy is at that point. Yeah, I'm sitting on a ton of stuff that I have unfortunately not finished. It is kind of weird for me that music has taken this kind of full circle journey in my life, where before it was like I had the 9 to 5 and I would do it in my spare time, and then I got to do it all the time. And then I kind of thought that I had merged the two, and I think I have, but now it's back to the point where if I did want to complete an album, I would probably like be doing it like at night or on the weekends or whatever. Which it just feels kind of silly, because I do quote unquote music all day long. So I think that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. I'm trying to reckon with the fact that it would kind of have to be moonlighting if I were to do it, and I think right now I'm enjoying just doing whatever I want in my spare time.
And I know the feeling. You got to use it all you can. One thing I wanted to ask about the plugins too. You talked about the sound design side. The visual design side is really striking and really beautiful. I mean, the interface, I know, is an amazingly complex and sort of thorny thing to work through. But even aside from that, visually, the way that they look is really remarkable, really beautiful, and sort of pulls you to it. When I realized in Coastline that there's this beautiful graphic to the coastline, and then sort of, these ridges are jutting out into the water and then receding with the sound, that sort of blew my mind.
Yeah.
And then Riverwalk has a fantastic version of that too, where there's this sort of, there's a kind of path through the audio, and then this wave of the filtered audio that's crashing over the raw sound bit by bit, and that cycle, makes you feel you could just get caught up in the whole experience of it. Are you working with the designer on that? And tell me where the visual side comes from.
No, that's all me. I think that was something that was really important to me when I started this, because, like I said, like taking inspiration from hardware, kind of the ability to just like display something is not really a thing in the world of hardware. And, I always got fed up with like, I love this pedal, but I don't remember like what it means when the LED is blinking versus when it's solid versus when it's like doing Morse code for SOS. Like, it was always a little frustrating to me. And it always, like, there are so many tools that I really had fun with, but ultimately gave up on, because I was like, I just wish this had a little screen on it and I knew what was going on. So I think that was really important to me when I kind of started this whole endeavor, just kind of the ability to display information as well as kind of keeping that like levity and making it more interesting than just, like a traditional EQ display or whatever, I wanted to try to think about like what's an interesting but unexpected way to display this. I sit with these ideas for a while and kind of think about like what might the theme of this product be. What could be a kind of like a naturalistic thing that kind of evokes that same feeling. I mean, the most obvious example and probably one that I'll never top was the first one, which was Weeping Wall, where the visual is essentially a traditional audio playback visual on its side. So it goes from top to bottom and it looks like a waterfall. And that's named after this this like wall in Glacier National Park in Montana, where the snow melt comes down and it's like basically always like has kind of a trickle of water going across it at like any time of year. And so that was kind of that was like I had the idea of, okay, what's a more interesting way to display a loop? And I was like, what if we rotated it 90 degrees? And then from there, I'm like, oh, this is like a waterfall. Oh, this is like Weeping Wall. Like, so that's usually kind of my thought process there. And, over time, like as I've done this, I've like learned more about, like I study like paintings, I study photography. I don't do any of these things, but like I try to, have the perspective at least of like an art critic, where I can kind of like understand the composition at play, understand like the color theory behind it, like how what are the interactions between these different choices that they're making, basically, which is something that I'm really interested in. And it's nice to kind of engage with that in a very limited capacity, because I mean, if you would even call the UIs pieces of art, that means that I've only made like 5 ever. So
well, they do a lot more than most pieces of art too, and it makes you want to use.
Thank you.
Makes you want to explore.
I mean, that's the other goal, honestly, is I wanted to make something that people wanted to use, something that they didn't, they don't want to close the window, and selfishly that they want to post on Instagram or whatever. Like, I wanted to make something that kind of like advertised itself to some extent, and kind of like, rather than having to tell you what this does, like, I mean, you could just look at it and kind of have fun trying to figure it out, basically.
Sure. And say a little bit about that, the process of finding buyers, finding your potential market through social media and otherwise. Has Instagram been particularly important to you, and what is where else do you look?
Yeah. So I think there was an interesting thing that happened around COVID where, everyone was stuck at home, and all of a sudden, like, everybody kind of had a lot more time for hobbies. And I think what I kind of experienced during that time was it felt a little bit like everyone was having fun and kind of rediscovering their hobbies and stuff. But there was a little bit of like shouting into the void to some extent, where like everyone kind of felt like the algorithm sucks now, but they can't get any engagement, whatever. But I think what was really happening was like more people were making music than wanted to like sit there on their phone listening to someone else make music. And I think I personally kind of went through that experience a little bit because I have like a very small like musical following, but people that had been following me because of the albums that I had done with like Mystery Circles, or just from wherever, I found that there was a lot of appetite there for people who were kind of following along because they liked the music, but also to some extent, like they wanted to make music like that. And I think from that point, it was kind of a fairly natural segue to kind of be like, hey, I'm actually making these instruments and these effects, and they're based off of techniques that I would use to compose songs. So maybe you'll find them interesting. So I think that was kind of the initial springboard, putting that out there to people who had followed me for my actual music. And I think, a decent number of them are musicians themselves. Sometimes it feels like when you're a musician and you're selling records, it kind of feels like we're all just like passing the same like $10 around, basically.
Have you seen a theme that says, it's a Venn diagram that says ambient musicians, ambient music listeners, and it's 100% overlap?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of how it felt. I mean, I wanted to put out these tools to people that I knew would think that they're interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily they agreed. And from there, I think Instagram is weird just because I post on it because I kind of have to. It used to be that I basically just posted stuff that I thought was cool. I didn't have any sort of schedule or anything. I would just be working on a piece and be like, oh, this is interesting. And I'd, upload a 1-minute snippet of it or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I still kind of do the same thing to some extent, but it is focused on the plugins and the business now. But I guess I think the difference now is that Instagram's kind of like one part of the puzzle. And I think overall, the goal is just putting yourself out there and like giving people as many possible avenues of finding you. And I think that's true even if you're not making plugins. I think that's true if you're a musician as well or working in whatever other field. I post little videos on Instagram. I do like tutorials on YouTube. I am doing all kinds of stuff like at any given point in time. So I'm, wearing all the hats in terms of the development and also the marketing and getting stuff out there as well.
Could you imagine hiring help?
It is tough because honestly, well, I don't think I work super well with others in terms of like, when I was in a band, I was always like, I want to write the songs, play the part that I wrote. Like, and I think I'm still kind of that way to some extent. I would be the boss that's like, why can't you just read my mind and know what I want and just do it? So I think at this stage, it's still fastest to just have an idea and bang it out really quick rather than going through the stage of having to explain it in plain English.
Yeah.
I am working with some marketing folks at this point to try to get stuff out there a little bit more. But all of like the creative and stuff is still in my hands.
You got to keep the part you love in your hands for as long as you can. Otherwise, what's the point?
Exactly. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I still have fun developing stuff. So I think I would be sad if I got to the point of like just explaining what I wanted to be done and then kind of just stood back and watched. I was working on something right before this that, I was just sitting here for like an hour and I was like, this is awesome. Like I'm like still having that experience.
Well, huge thanks for taking the time and for sharing the plugins and all the insight into them. Like I will be using them constantly and
yeah, thank you.
Spreading the word, beyond in the podcast, obviously, and beyond, because, you're doing incredible work and I'm so thrilled you're having success with it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thanks for the chat, Steve.